All right. As we get into this, I will tell you this. I mentioned this, I think, last week as well, that sometimes I speak extemporaneously, and sometimes these topics have taken my brain deep, and even in preparation this week. And so there are parts that I will read to you that are very fresh, and it's also given me some pathways to think about. My next book is kind of on this concept of whole, and this idea of paradox has been a big part of that. And so this is fresh stuff, but also I think that, Daniel always mentions this, that I am a leader in process. I went to go with my 92-year-old dad yesterday to buy him a new cell phone. And the guy who was at the cell phone desk, he says, "So what do you do? What's your job?" And I always have a hard time describing my job. And I said, "Well, I'm a leader in a leader development company. Like, so that's what we do." And he goes, "Well, you must be a boss leader." And I said, "Well, I'm in process. I'm figuring it out like the rest of us." And that's my hope, is I think we're trying to practice what we preach. So let's go. So I have to admit to something to you right out of the gate. I have become slightly hooked on Formula One racing. And I don't know if you have seen this, but if any of you, and by the way, you guys all have something you binge. So don't, like, nobody's holier than I am on here. You have something that if it's not binge watching, it's something you drink too much coffee or something. I've been binge watching the Formula One show on Netflix. Anybody, can I have any nods? If there's anybody out there who knows what I'm talking about, I just sold it. So Netflix owes us something, but I'm loving this thing. And so try to explain this to you. I'm in season 3. So I've kind of gotten to know the players. There's only 20 teams. Sorry, I think there's 10 teams, and there's 20 people who are racing, right? In these, by the way, Formula One is car racing. If you don't know, it's not NASCAR, which I call the left turn circuit. This is actually where you actually turn the cars. And so I'm in season 3, and what happens is these teams from Mercedes and Ferrari and these different teams have to construct a car before the season starts. Very technical. These are high performance cars. And in season 2, Mercedes kind of is winning everything. They didn't always, but now they're winning everything. They have a design of a car that's pretty amazing and intense. So one of the teams that has a much smaller budget is trying to rise up. And when they unveil the cars at the beginning of season 3, one of the teams that has a name that you probably wouldn't know, like Mercedes, their car comes out, and everyone is astonished because the car looks just like the Mercedes car that was the championship car from the previous season. Are you with me? So the car that they unveil it's a copy, which now this question comes up about whether or not this is cheating, because the engineers are supposed to create a car, but the rules are a little vague about what can be copied and what can't. I say all that because one of the teams get really upset about this. And so they file a complaint formally to see whether or not they're cheating and what's going to be the implications of that. And this is why I tell you this story, is because there's a quote that I took from the series that one of the principals, who's basically the head coach of the Formula One team, he says this: "I want to know what we are playing for today and playing for tomorrow." I found that interesting because he's basically saying, like, I need to understand the rules, whatever this committee decides about whether this is cheating or not, so that I can think about how to plan today. What are we playing for today, and what are we playing for tomorrow? There's this sense in which what happens today with this decision will affect that. And it's this reality that there's this connection between what we're experiencing today and doing this short term and what we'll experience tomorrow. It's always there, and it impacts us every day. So here's another story from a different perspective. Again, personal, it's not about Netflix, but I run most days. I run slow, I jog. I run about 2.25 miles a day, so I don't run far. I'm not a runner. It's painful, but I keep doing it. I don't know why, but I keep doing it. So the last 3 days, something has happened to me. I run on this path, and Google has a big complex that they've built, and they're building this big construction site. And I'm running along this trail, this awesome running trail, and I run every day. For the past 3 days, the weirdest thing has happened. Right at this construction site, across the trail, what I have seen is the same thing every day. I'm looking down, at my feet. I have seen a snail on the path in the same place for 3 days straight. And it's alive. Okay, it's not dead. Some of you are like, it's because it's dead, Rob. It's not dead. I went down to look, I stopped today to look at it, and it actually is moving. And I have this weird like thing as I'm looking at the snail and I'm going, you're crossing concrete. And do you see that where you're going is you're going over to the dirt. I see the dirt there, snail guy. And I don't know if it's a guy or not, but it's like, I see that. And I see the bushes, and beyond the bushes, I can see the giant Google construction site. Like it's just a massive building under construction. And I don't know why, but here's some of the questions that come to mind about my little friend, the snail. I don't even know if it's the same snail. So that's what I actually wrote. Here's the first question. Are you the same snail? And then I think, where are you going every day? I'm weird, I know. It's like, where are you going? You must be going somewhere, because otherwise you would have dried out and died by now. Like a snail, as far as I can tell, like the gooey little snail crawling across the thing, like it has to get somewhere that's got more moisture than that concrete. And just forgive me, who do you meet along the way? Other snails, other animals, other people like me who almost step on you, like get out of the way. Do you see how dangerous it is? His like the shell is intact. Do you see that beyond the dirt and the bushes that you're going to encounter, there's a construction site and a new Google complex? And what would change, little snail, if you could step back and see all the things I can see? And it's so, well, I wrote this last thing, or maybe you're moving slowly enough and with enough intention that you aren't so worried about what I'm worried about, and you know you're part of something much larger. So here's my starting question for you. If you stepped back and could see the connection between today, tomorrow, and the things that you are starting that may or may not be yours to finish, what would change for you? If you stepped back and could see the connection between today, tomorrow, and the things you are starting that may not be yours to finish, what would change for you? We are in the middle of a series. This is on the People Paradox series. And I want to mention this because paradox is such a fundamental thing to our reality. It is one of the, I would suggest, one of the most advanced executive competencies that most of us could begin to learn if we haven't learned it already. It is such an incredible thing to begin to think about the tension we face. Last week, Daniel and I were, I guess, is it 2 weeks ago, Daniel? We actually had our first face-to-face engagement, and I was about to go up and speak, and there were about 1,000 people in the room. And when I was outside, I needed a volunteer to do something. I've done this before, where I needed a volunteer to step up on stage and serve as my example of a leader. And so I'm outside, Daniel and I walk up, and I found one of the staff from this conference, and I said, hey, would you do something for me? There's going to be a moment where I'm going to give a talk, and I'm going to give you a cue, and then I need you to come up on the stage, and I need you to stand at the back of the stage until I say this, until I say, Jessica, will you go first for us? And at that moment, I told her she's going to step out in front on this stage. This is someone, I literally just picked her out of a group of staff guarding the door. What I didn't know was that Jessica had been on the job for 2 days. So she's been a part of this organization for 2 days. I put her up on the stage, and I had this entire audience of people stare at her. And the reason why I did that is because I wanted them to be aware. I was talking about the reality that a leader is a person who goes first. And I wanted them to understand and feel what it's like to actually be that person. And what I talked about is I said, look at Jessica. What is it like to be her? Why is it quantitatively and qualitatively different being in the position of leader than not? And I also wanted them to think about the multiple paradoxes that are going to be a part of her reality that she may not be prepared for. There are going to be these tensions that will pull her in all kinds of different ways. The tensions between doing what she thinks is important and paying attention to what everyone else thinks is important. The tensions between her life and work. The tensions from being present and making progress. The paradox between her strengths and her weaknesses, or her competencies and her blind spots. Between her purpose, her greater purpose on her life and her job. Between her friends and her leadership. Between looking forward as she stepped out on that stage and also looking back long enough to see what her followers might need from her. Between resourcing and budgets and things of her heart. And I would also say this between the long and the short term, that's a fundamental competence. I have a tool in front of me. This is a competency tool. Let me just read you this, and then we're going to keep going on this short versus long term. This is the executive competency of the leadership competency of dealing with paradox. Is very flexible and adaptive, can always act in ways that seem contradictory, can be both tough and compassionate, empathetic and objective, can lead and follow, can be an individual contributor and a team player, can be self-confident and appropriately humble. Welcome to leadership, right? Is seen as balanced despite the conflicting demands of the situation. Paradox, when Jessica leads for the first time, if she hasn't already, is going to be a reality for her. And by the way, if any of you are looking at these cards I'm holding and saying, hey, where'd you get the cards? Don't buy the cards, go buy the WiLD toolkit. It's this is 30 years old, and the toolkit has those kinds of competencies within it. That's my shameless plug. So let's talk about what's going on in this short versus long term. So I have another this concept of dealing with the short and long term, it's a challenging thing to even begin to describe. So let me tell you one more story. My dad has written like 46 books that are somewhere, he'd probably correct me and say it's like 48. He's 92, he turned 92 on Wednesday. And he's written some amazing things. It's interesting because one of the books is on my shelf back there that he wrote. This is where the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, because it's called A Future with a History. Talk about short versus long term. My dad's like thinking about this broader thing, but he's written in several of his books about a call that he and my mom felt to go to India early in their career. And he'd written that. And so at one point, a leader from India came to Seattle to meet with us, to meet with my dad. And I got the privilege of just being a part of the conversation. And this leader sat down with my dad and he said, Dr. McKenna, I've read your story about the calling you felt to India, but I know you've never been there. And he said, we've launched a university that is going to be completely focused on providing higher education to the Dalit and tribal people of India, people who would never have access to education, a university education. And he said, I want to launch a leadership center and I want to name it after you and Janet. And my dad, he told a whole story that was about that. That's my paraphrase of it. And my dad said to him, he said, the names on building things is what compels me. He said, if I say yes, what will it get you? And he said, with the government officials, it can be very tricky. He said, what I will do is when I talk to them and I talk to them about the people who are supporting this effort, I will slide your 46 books across the table and say, this is who's behind this. And they will say yes. They will allow us to build this building. And my dad said, okay, I'm in. You had me there. So let's do this. So here's the thing. I'm sitting there knowing full well my dad is not going to India. My mother is not going to India. They're in their 80s at the time. So I started thinking, all right, I'm sitting at the table. Guess who's going to India? So I've ended up, that was years and years ago. That's probably 10 years ago that occurred. And I've gone 8 times now. I never could have imagined that I would have so many friends in India. Like I have just dear, I probably have 24 dear friends. You don't have time to have close friendships with everybody, but I got maybe 24 really good friends. And then I've got a couple of hundred of acquaintances and friendships that have started. And the reason why I tell you this story is because my parents felt this call that my dad documented and wrote down, but they've never been. And it's been such an interesting journey for me that has affected so many things. My experience in that part of the world has affected so many things personally about my perspective on things. And it was interesting because the second year when we were going to go dedicate this building, I was going to go to catch a flight, and I was making a necklace, and I'm wearing this right now with this little washer for my wife Jackie and my 11 and 13-year-old boys at the time. They're now older than that, Aiden and Ryan. I'm wearing the necklace now. It's a simple washer. My hope was that this necklace would remind each of us when we're apart that we're connected together, even though we're separated by thousands of miles. We shared dinner with my parents, and the night before, and I said a prayer, and I said these words. I don't know why, but I said the loop is closed. And when I said that, as I was And as I was threading through this rope through a washer, I got this email from my dad the next morning that said, the loop is now closed. I didn't even know he picked that up. And I just had chills go down my spine because I'm reading this note from him. And he went on to describe the loops that begin in the past, that are sometimes closed in our present, and that are sometimes closed by others in the future. Here's what is crazy about this. Like, this crazy thing that my parents would have felt such a strong call to a place they've never been to, that has now become a deep rooting for me, but this reminder that it's probably about something that is far beyond me. And so this last in fall of 2020, right before COVID, sort of we knew what was happening in January, my son and I went, and there's a picture, Daniel, if you could put that up on the screen. This is my son and me in front of that building that's now built. And as I look at that, it gives me a very different perspective. That is not just about my dad. It's not just about me. It's not even about whether that building will exist. It's not just about my son, but it's about a very long-term perspective about the part that we might play in someone's life that we may or may not ever meet, or may even never remember our names. And for me to even look at Aiden right there, just that my son has friends in another part of the world is just a very different thing. So I want to ask you this question. If you stepped back and could see the connection between today, tomorrow, and the things that you are starting that may not be yours to finish, what would change for you? It's really, when it comes to leadership development, and it's long and the short term, it's been really challenging for me because I've been I was a department chair for 25 years on a university campus for a couple of different graduate programs. And I was trying to prepare these mostly young people, not all, but mostly fairly young, in their late 20s and 30s, for a future that they couldn't see yet. And one of the challenging pieces of that was sometimes they received that well and sometimes they didn't. And trying to give them a larger perspective on a future reality, where my hope, and I would say this to him, and I never knew if it would land, as my hope was that someday they might have this weird little McKenna sitting on their shoulder saying, like, it's okay. Like that somehow you were prepared for this. I told you the pressure was coming, and here it is. I told you the paradoxes and the tensions were coming when the first time that you lead, and there it is. But my hope was, because we graduated over 400 students in one particular program out into some of the most powerful corporations in the world. And this was one of my greatest fears I had, was that all I did was made these corporations bigger. And I was hoping that they would remember when I would say to them, I would say over and over again until I was just felt like my mouth was broken. I would say it so much, is that these places will make you feel something about yourself. They have that capacity without intention to feel something about yourself that may or may not be true. And be aware that you're not there simply to make them bigger. And you won't even think about it that way, because what you'll do is you'll start pressing into the urgent of the now and the results and the score and the metrics and the salary and all those things that are important. I wanted them to hold that, like getting a job is important, and resourcing your family and thinking about that is important, but also to hold this perspective about the long haul, about something that may happen today that's important, that's urgent, something that may happen tomorrow. Because most of the time when we think about long versus short term, it's more in a business sense, where it's like, think strategically or think about what you're executing right now. I think the wild thing to think about, the thing that's crazy to think about, what if there's another perspective that's important, or it's the long haul? That it's not going to be about what we're remembered for. I did work in aerospace for years, and one of the things that was said in this particular company that all of you know that's been making airplanes since the 50s, an executive said this: leading in this company is like putting your hand in a bucket of water. When you pull your hand out, no one will ever know you're there. Just the most tragic thing I'd ever heard from an executive in like with $1 billion budget. And I thought to myself, because I was in my 30s at the time when this executive said this to me. So I'm listening and I'm trying to, like, is there truth in that? But here's what I thought about immediately in the day that I was reflecting on his comment, was that the difference was that someone saw that you had your hand in that bucket of water. Whether or not they remember it was your hand or not, it's like, I also think about that imagery of like footprints on a beach, where it's like those footprints get washed away fast by a wave, and someone will say like, that's what it's like. And I'm like, yes and no. Because what's more important is that development is a relational process, because someone saw us walk together on that beach. And we can't see, if we even get a glimpse of our impact, what an amazing gift that is, but we don't always. And so I don't want you to hear me taking pressure off the urgent. If there's something that I hold on to, is the necessity for thinking about, what is it that I'm doing now? So I come back to that question. If you stepped back and could see the connection between your actions today, tomorrow, and the things you are starting that may not be yours to finish, what would change for you? Oh man. I just one piece before I finish with a thought, and then let's get out into conversation, because these are questions I have. I hope you hear me expressing, trying to figure it out. Because the questions are also, this about what we do, is the questions where so much of our development, probably most of our development, happens. It's interesting. I'm gonna geek out I'm just gonna take one segue psychologically. All right. It's interesting because I've been a part of a process of graduating a ton of PhDs out into the field, who will go out, and we taught them deep psychological research skills, the same methodologies used across every other kind of science our students were learning. And one of the things that we would teach them is what's called time series designs. So how to actually include time as a variable. And Daniel and I had a really interesting conversation the other day about, we had the necessity for teaching students how to model time as a variable. But here's the reality. I know, and Daniel will nod, we're talking about this, most of them will never, ever use those designs in a study. Because the study of time it's complex, it's difficult, and ironically, it's time consuming. So to actually collect data and to model time is difficult to do. And so I think that it's interesting, because so often we avoid this longer play kind of conversation. So let me read you one last thing. Let's get out into conversations. Is this. The longer play perspective is that we may or may not be the ones to finish the work we started, but the start we provided may make a difference. That's a tough message for leaders, because it shifts the focus to a mission that we will hopefully fulfill, but only in part. It means preparing successors is not only to focus on our legacy, but on their capacity to lead long after we're gone. And our job is simply to play a role, maybe to simply play a role in getting them ready. A long play perspective means that the outcomes in the short term matter as measures of progress, but not as measures of whole impact. It's a shift from a sole focus on our own efforts and wins to the efforts of those who surround us and will follow after us. The point is this: whole and intentional leader development demands a short-term and a long-term perspective. Our progress today matters, and equally important is our investment in the leaders who will follow after us. It requires us to start with the assumption that we are developing leaders who may or may not finish the work we start, but who will likely play a considerable role in getting us to it. It's so fundamental that it's like just embracing that possibility. So I come back to my question. If you stepped back and could see the connection between today, tomorrow, and the things you are starting that may or may not be yours to finish, what would change for you? And I think maybe everything. I think it could change everything. As I even think about my schedule for the rest of today. But so often it's, I think the urgent takes the front seat. And so that's where I just to give you some fodder for this conversation, let's go. Many of you as possible, if you want to jump in and see what the tools are about, it's our way to actually put some scaffolding on conversations like this that has practical implications. So the last thing was this: when I went to India the second year, the building was done, and I was asked to give the dedication to that building. They were going to bring a bunch of people to campus. And the night before, I was feeling pretty sick. I was feeling this really deeply, like this burden of, I kind of feeling the burden of those loops, if you know what I'm talking about. Like I'm feeling like, I'm carrying the weight for my family and whatever else. And so I was not feeling well. And I asked the team that I was with there if I could head back and go to bed. And I get in the car, and when I got in the car, this driver is taking me back to campus. And I said, so what do you do when you're not here? And he said, I'm a pastor. And I said, oh, interesting. And I said, what's your church like? And he said, well, it's a church of about 7,000 people. First of all, that struck me, because I'm like, first thing I was, why are you driving my car? And because if you're a pastor of a church of 7,000 in the US, like, you're a mega church pastor, like, you aren't driving anybody's car anywhere. You don't have time to do that. But he was just this amazing guy. But he said this to me, and he did not know that the title of my talk the next day was going to be "The Loop is Closed." That's what was going to be my dedication, 15-minute talk. He said this. He described his desire for whatever started with him would be completed through his children. I kid you not. He did not know what my talk was going to be about. And so he named his first son Abelesh, meaning good desire. And he said that the same desire my parents have for me and for my grandchildren is the desire and vision he has for his children. And so I finished coming back to that question I asked you, that I'll continue to ask myself this week. If you stepped back and could see the connection between today, tomorrow, and the things you are starting that may or may not be yours to finish, what would change for you? So I'm just grateful you all are here. Keep coming. It's an amazing community.